Hello and welcome to this video tutorial where I'm going to run you through the development of the dartboard cabinet in Google SketchUp. I'm going to run you through all of the individual pieces of the project and then how we assemble them together to a finished product. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what we're looking for, at the moment you can see on my screen the closed cabinet. You should be able to get to a point where you can manipulate your SketchUp model to look like an opened or a exploded cabinet either. And in order to do this, it's important that we look at each of the individual pieces within the project and draw each of those pieces as one of the individual components within SketchUp so that then they can be assembled kind of in the same way we would in the workshop. Okay. Now, to do that, I'll be working through one piece at a time and we'll work our way through each of those drawings. So to get ourselves started, we're going to set up our workspace. So I'm going to open a brand new SketchUp file up. Okay, now, when we open within SketchUp, sometimes we'll ask you which template you want to use. So I'll just show you the new from template. And in terms of picking the template, it probably doesn't matter too much which one you pick, but if you want to make the least number of changes in terms of your setup, make sure you pick one that has a millimeters below it, just so you're using the right decimal units. Okay, so you've got architectural millimeters, you've got plan view in millimeters, you've got woodworking in millimeters. It doesn't really matter too much. Now, the temptation would be to use woodworking in millimeters because that's what we're working with. But later on, that gray background you can see can present a bit of a problem for us. It's easy to fix, but I prefer just to stick into plan view. And you can see that's why I've got that set as my default favorite. So here we go. I'm in my brand new template. Then open your window menu up at the top of your screen, and in window, I like to make sure that I've got materials showing. I like to make sure that I've got components showing. They're the main two things that I like to have available so that I can constantly use them throughout the creation of my SketchUp models. From here, the very first thing I'm going to then do is to save as, give your project a name, save it somewhere convenient, and press save. Now, throughout your project, I'm going to remind you to press save regularly. The file will get quite big because we're creating all of the individual components. So you want to make sure you're spending the time to get it right. So let's get ourselves started. We're going to start in the same way we did in the workshop. I'm going to start by drawing the two sides of the dartboard cabinet first, because probably one of the simplest bits to draw. So I'll start with my rectangle tool. So up here, rectangle tool. I'm going to click in the center here of the origin point. I'm going to click once and drag my mouse out, and you'll see that I've got this rectangle that's able to change sizes. If you then look down here to the bottom right of my screen, you'll see some dimensions there. And as I move the rectangle around, you'll see those dimensions change. Now, you can try your very best to guess exactly the position of the size that we need to get to, but it takes too long and isn't the best and most efficient way to do it. So instead, what we're going to be doing is have a look at the rectangle. You can see it's taller than it is wide. And then when we look down at the dimensions, we can see one dimension is 4,200 and the other one is 15,300. And so in this set of dimensions, I've got the width, then a comma, and then the height in millimeters. And that's important because what I can do now is I can put in the measurements that I want. So the width that I want is 90. Then I put a comma in, and I type in 780 for the height. And if you look down at my dimension box, so you can see that you've got the right thing, 90, 780. And when I press enter, it's going to draw the piece of timber or the rectangle that I want to work with, which is 90 millimeters wide and 780 millimeters tall. Now it looks really small on your screen. Remember that SketchUp has an unlimited plane to work within. So when you draw things, they sometimes look small. Don't just draw them big so you can see them. Draw them to the right size and then use your zoom buttons. So at the top, there's a zoom extents button. It's a magnifying glass with 3 little arrows coming out of it. If you click that, it'll zoom into the rectangle we've just drawn. Now, if you want to prove that we've drawn it correctly, you can get your tape measure tool. You can click on the first point and the second point, and you'll see down in the bottom right where the dimensions were previously, it now says length 90 millimeters. And then I can also click and hover over this point, and the length now says 780 millimeters. So I've got those two dimensions correct. And to get out of that, I can press escape. So I've got my first rectangle. Now this is the overall piece of timber that we're working with. The next thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be drawing in the very top of the cabinet. Now, the top of the cabinet, if I just go back to my previous model, the top of the cabinet has a mortise and tenon joint. And so I'm drawing this piece here, okay, the side there. And so it's got two holes at the top, okay, mortise holes for the tenons of the top rails to fit into. So that's what I'm going to start with drawing. We go back to my model here and we'll switch around. So I'm going to be working at just at the top, and I'm just scrolling up with my mouse to zoom in so I can see everything that I need to see. Now, some of the things that we do in SketchUp can involve drawing rectangles and deleting them out later. And that's probably an easy way to get ourselves started. So I'm going to draw myself a rectangle, and this time I'm going to draw a rectangle that is 70 millimeters tall and 19 millimeters wide. Okay, and you can see I've now drawn that rectangle. I'm going to do the same on the other side, 70 by 19. And if you're watching down in my dimensions column, I'm just typing 70, 19 to get the exact dimensions I want. Now, this rectangle, I'm just going to change a color for you just so you can see where I'm talking. This rectangle here indicates the top rail, exactly where it's going to sit and where it's going to fit. So I need to cut my mortise out from within this. And the dimensions for that are fairly simple. We're going to be using the offset tool, okay, which is next to, it's 2 across from the rectangle. It's a circle with an arrow to a red circle. And what I'm doing is I'm going to select the outside of my rectangle. And as I drag in, you can see that it makes a nice neat square, a nice neat rectangle. And I'm going to type number 6 and press enter. Now what that does is create a 6 millimeter offset from all edges the whole way around, which is exactly the measurement that we use for our mortise and tenon. So to my select tool, click into the middle and delete, and I've now got a hole there. And that indicates to you where the hole is going to be cut out for my tenon. So let's repeat that process. Offset, click on the outside. You can see I accidentally clicked twice and I've now got a rectangle where I don't want. Command Z will undo it. Click on the outside, drag it in, type the number 6 and press enter, and that locks into place. Click into the middle and delete it out. Okay. Now that I've got that sorted, I can actually delete these outsides of the rectangle that I no longer need. And I've now got the top of my project ready to go. At this point, I'm going to shift out of the front plan view to my isometric view. Now, the keyboard shortcut for that is Command 7, or I can go to Camera, Standard Views, ISO, which stands for Isometric View. Now, once you get to this point, you can see that the model looks a little bit weird on the screen, and that's all to do with the way that it's presented to you. And by default, it presents to us in perspective. We kind of want to turn that off because it's a little bit deceptive in how it presents things. So back in the camera menu, you can see I've got a tick next to perspective. Instead, I'm going to select parallel projection, and it's going to tidy up some of my lines for me to make it look a little bit more accurate around what I'm actually producing. So from here, I now have my rectangle with my 2 mortise holes, but you can see my timber has no depth to it. Okay, it's just a flat line. It's kind of like a sheet of paper. I need to make this into a 3-dimensional drawing, and I do that using the push-pull tool. When I select that and hover my mouse over the center of my drawing, you see all the blue little dots appear. Click once and release, and then I drag up and drag down, and you'll see that enables me to make it 3-dimensional. Now, just like all of our dimension related things, down in the bottom right hand corner, you can see it now says distance, and the distance increases as I move it away from that initial plane. So I want to increase it. The thickness of the timber we're working with is 19 millimeters thick. So I type in 19 and press enter, and then that snaps to my correct size. What I now have on my screen is a block of timber with 2 mortises cut out of it. I can go to my color wheel, okay, window, materials if you don't have it, opens this window up. From within here, I select the brick icon, and then from the drop-down menu, I select wood. Select one of the wood color options and use my paintbrush tool to paint that onto the screen. Okay. I now have that piece of timber ready and raring to go. Now, that's the first joint. I've got the top joint, which is the mortise joint, so the tenons to fit inside for the rails. But down the bottom of the piece, there's also 2 stopped housing joints. So that's what we're going to be working on now. So let's zoom in towards the bottom, okay, and start working towards that goal. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can get to this point. Okay, let's try the tape measure point. I'm going to find the middle here and draw up. And I'm going to draw up a distance of 70 millimeters and press enter. And I've now got a dotted line. Dotted lines are construction lines. They're there for me to see, but they're not part of the project. So they just help me with getting my dimensions correct. They're really good for helping me put things in the right position. I'm going to do the same again. This time I'm going to press 89. And you'll see I now have 2 parallel lines. This is important because the distance between this one and this one, okay, the 2 parallel lines, is 19 millimeters, which is the distance or the thickness of the timber I'm working with. And therefore, it's the right distance for me to put my housing joint in. I can then use my rectangle tool from one of the sides and draw in a rectangle that is 19 millimeters high, 70 millimeters wide, and snap that into position. And that's my first housing joint ready to go. I do the same again, use my measurement tool, use my measurements from the drawing, which is 179, and the next one up is 179 plus 19, okay? Or I can actually just draw from the bottom corner like this without the top dotted lines. So bottom corner, click and drag, and I want 19 by 70, and it snaps into position. Select tool, click on the dotted line until they turn blue, and delete to remove those construction lines out of the way because we no longer need those. Back into isometric, which again, Command 7 is the keyboard shortcut, or camera menu, standard views, ISO. You can now see that I've got my 2 housing joints sitting on top, but they haven't actually been cut out of the timber. To do this, I use push-pull, select the middle, drag down, okay? And I have to work out how far down do I actually want to pull this. And this is all based on the dimensions within the project. For this one, I'm going to do 9.5 and 9.5. I now have finished the first piece, the first side of the carcass. Now, all the pieces are here, but it's not working in the way that I would expect it to. Now, what I mean by that is if I look at it, you'll see that that piece is lying down, where in reality in the project it's standing up. So to fix this, I'm going to highlight it. Okay, now I've used the select tool. I've made sure I've dragged the whole way around all parts of it. So the whole thing is turned blue and it's got some dotted blue points in the middle of it. I'll then be using my rotate tool. And that gives me a little protractor here. And I want the protractor to turn red so it's on its side. Click. Draw a line up to the end with a green line and click. And now I have the option to rotate. Now I can put it at any angle I want, but if I wanted a specific angle, just like with dimensions, down in the bottom right, I can type in 90 and press enter, and that's now locked into the position that I want it to be. Again, I'm going to rotate it one more time now. On the blue protractor, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees again, so that this side that I've got of my carcass is now facing the correct direction. And I can use my move tool. I can get the bottom corner and move it into that first position. And there you have it. I've now finished the left-hand side of my carcass. Now the left-hand side and the right-hand side are almost the same, but because of these housing joints, they're actually opposites. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a copy of this. I'm going to select the whole thing. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, Command C to make a copy, and then Command V to paste it. I'm just going to click it onto that red line there. And I need to now flip this so that the joinery appears on the inside. If I use my rotate tool and I look to the other side here, you see there's no joinery in here. I want that joinery to appear. So we're going to play with some of the tools, and we're going to be working on a tool that enables us to flip. And then we work out which way do we want to flip it. Okay. And if we click on red, see how it's flipped and now the joinery is on the inside? Get out of the flip tool and we're now sorted. I now have my two sets of joinery. Now you'll notice that the stopped housing is stopped at the front, but over here it's stopped at the back. So again, I'm going to use my select tool. I'm going to flip, and I'm going to see by pressing the green, this time it's flipped it around and it's into the correct rotation. So I've now got my two stops at the front. Rotate around, and you can see that they're now a matching set, and that's exactly what we want. Now, in just a couple of minutes, we've drawn both the left and the right side of our carcass. What we need to do from here is we need to save our project, so Command S, and now we're going to start creating these as components. Highlight just the left one. We're going to go right click, make component, and we're going to name this left carcass side, and then press create. Over in our components window, you'll now see left carcass side has appeared as one of our pieces. If you don't have your components, again, it's window, click on components to get that to show up. Repeat that process by highlighting the right side, right click, make component, right carcass side, and create. Now, the benefit of having these components sitting here is you can just click into your components window and you can get them whenever you want. In fact, I can delete everything out of my model, so I've got a clean space to work, and I can click back into my components and I'm always able to get it back. Components is a really important part of modeling 3D projects that have multiple pieces. So now that you've got your left and your right carcass, you can delete them from your screen as well. Make sure they stay in your components window. And once you've convinced yourself you've got that correct, Command S to once again save your project. Now we're going to move on to drawing the second piece, which is our top rails. Now our top rail is a nice simple rectangle. So I'm going to go into my front view again, my plan view. And again, we can go to camera menu, standard views. We've got top views, front views. It doesn't really matter, but let's have a look at front view. Front view should have a blue line going up and down and a red line along the horizon. Clicking at the origin point and dragging so I can get the piece that I want, I'm going to write in some dimensions. And the dimensions that I'm going to be working with, just going to quickly do a calculation for you to make sure I get them right, is 598. Okay, that's the length. And the width that we're working with here is 70. Click enter, and you'll see that that now appears. From this piece, we need to carve out our tenon joint, and we also need to make it 3D. So I'm going to start with 3D. Command 7 to put me into isometric, select my push-pull tool, and make this 19mm stick. From here, I'm going to zoom into the end. I'm going to use sorry for that. I'm going to use the offset tool. Again, I'm going to draw it in. My offsets come in by 6mm, the same way that they did for my previous project or the previous joint that we're working on. And the reason they need to match is so that the tenon fits inside of the mortise hole. Okay, now, I'm having a bit of trouble getting this to set right because of the angle that I'm using and how zoomed in I am. So I'm just going to rotate around until I can get it exactly how I want it. And you may experience the same sort of issue as well. Okay, so there we have it. Now I can use my push-pull tool to push this back by 19, and I now have my tenon sticking out. Gonna zoom out, rotate around, zoom in, offset again, push-pull by 19, zoom out, rotate around, Command 7 to get me into isometric view. Highlight everything, select my materials, and drag that onto my project. And I've now done my top rail. Highlight all, right click, make component, top rail, create. And now in my components window, I have left carcass, right carcass, and top rail. Save your project. And now I'm going to show you the importance of making sure that you have components. I'm going to do that by starting to assemble some of the project, just as a bit of a test for you. I've got my left carcass and my top rail only at the moment, just to show you how this works. Using my move tool, I can move pieces or components by specific points of them. So I know that this corner here that I've just picked needs to touch this corner here. Okay, so let me just draw a line. This corner here needs to touch this corner here once it's assembled. So I use my move tool to click on the corner and then click on the corresponding corner, and those two pieces have now snapped together. And if I rotate around, because I've done my dimensions correctly, what I can actually see is the mortise and tenon have connected. Now, if I wanted to prove to you that that's worked, I'm just going to change my top rail to be a color that's a little bit easier to see. You don't need to do this, but I'm just going to do this just for demonstration purpose. You can see there how the tenon is fitting perfectly inside of that mortise. I can use this corner to connect up, or I can use this corner to connect to that spot. It doesn't matter, because if my dimensions have been done correctly and my joinery is a matching set, then they will fit together. Okay, so as you can see, the importance of components becomes a bit of a simple trick later on when it comes to assembling your project to make it look nice in SketchUp. So that's why we're going to the effort of creating the components each time as we work our way through. That's enough for this video. As you move into the next video, I'm going to be working on the bottom shelf and then starting to assemble the carcass for you so that we can save that and start moving it into layout and you can start dimensioning. Hope that's been nice and clear for you, and good luck in sketching up.